After graduating college, I moved into a cheap apartment near the outskirts of town. Don't picture some rundown slum though, as the building and surrounding area were pretty decent. I'm honestly not sure why it was so cheap, but that doesn't really matter for this story. What does matter is that the guy living across the hallway from me was a total creep. His name was Dave, and I met him on like my third day there. Dave mentioned he was 27, but looked older, like in his 40s, and had a beard. He also had crazy eyes and would keep looking around whenever he talked to you. The way he spoke was odd too, like he'd get paranoid and almost violent at times. I quickly learned to try to avoid him, as every conversation started to feel like a confrontation, even if I had no idea what he was upset about. The building was small, just 3 floors with maybe a dozen units total, and my place was on the 2nd floor, apartment 2B. Dave was in 2A, directly opposite me, so dodging him wasn't always easy. The hallways were narrow, with that old carpet that muffled footsteps, and the lights were these dim fluorescents that buzzed faintly at night. I'd hear him sometimes, shuffling around behind his door or muttering to himself. At first, I chalked it up to him being some eccentric loner, maybe dealing with mental health stuff. Live and let live, right? But then the little things started adding up. It began about a week in. I was coming home late from my new job at a warehouse, nothing glamorous, just stocking shelves overnight, and as I fumbled with my keys, I felt eyes on me. I glanced up, and there was Dave, standing in his doorway, just staring. No hello, no nod, nothing. His beard was unkempt, like he hadn't trimmed it in months, and those eyes, they darted from me to the stairwell, then back, like he was expecting something to jump out. "You hear them?" he whispered, his voice gravelly and urgent. I froze. "Hear what?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He leaned in closer, too close. I could smell stale coffee on his breath. "The whispers, in the walls, they know you're new." I laughed it off nervously, mumbled something about being tired, and slipped inside my apartment. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake it. The walls were thin, sure, but I hadn't heard any whispers. Just the usual creaks of an old building settling. A few days later, I ran into him again in the laundry room in the basement. It was one of those dingy spots with coin-operated machines that hummed loudly, and fluorescent bulbs that flickered just enough to give you a headache. I was loading my clothes when he appeared out of nowhere, carrying a basket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. "You're not like the last one," he said, slamming his dryer door shut. I pretended to focus on the detergent. "Last one?" He paused, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. "The guy before you, in 2B, he didn't listen. Thought it was all in his head." Dave's tone shifted, getting that paranoid edge, almost accusatory. "They got to him. Made him leave in the middle of the night. You hear the scratching yet?" I shook my head, heart picking up a bit. "No man, just normal stuff." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "It's not normal. They're testing you. Watch your vents." Then he grabbed his basket and stormed out, leaving me alone with the whirring machines. That conversation stuck with me. I started paying more attention to the apartment. At night, when everything was quiet, I'd hear faint sounds, scraping like nails on wood, coming from behind the walls or maybe the ceiling. I told myself it was rats or pipes expanding, but it always seemed to happen around 2 or 3 a.m., right when I was drifting off. One time, I even got up and pressed my ear to the wall shared with Dave's unit. Nothing at first, then a low murmur, like someone talking softly on the other side. Was he up, ranting to himself, or was it something else? Things escalated when I found the note. It was slipped under my door one morning, scribbled on a torn piece of notebook paper. They were watching through the peephole. Cover it. There was no signature, but I knew it was Dave. I crumpled it up and tossed it, but later that day I caught myself glancing at my door's peephole. It was one of those standard ones, a little fisheye lens. On a whim, I taped a piece of paper over it from the inside. I felt stupid, but hey, better safe than sorry, right? That night, the scratching was louder. It wasn't just in the walls anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the vents, those old metal grates in the floor and ceiling. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and shone it into one by the bed. I saw dust bunnies and cobwebs, and nothing else. But as I lay there, I swear I heard breathing, shallow and rhythmic, like someone holding back. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and yelled, "Hello?" There was only silence. Then, from the hallway, a soft knock on my door. It was after midnight at this point. I crept over, peeled back the tape on the peephole, and looked out. Dave was standing there, right in front of my door, staring straight at the lens like he knew I was watching. His face was distorted through the glass, eyes wide and wild. "Let me in," he mouthed, not speaking aloud. I didn't answer, instead just backing away. The knocking stopped after a minute, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I knocked on his door, ready to confront him and tell him to leave me alone or I'd call the landlord. There was no answer, so I tried the knob on a hunch, and it turned. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me first. It was musty, like old newspapers and something metallic. His place was a mirror of mine, but cluttered with boxes stacked high and papers everywhere. Scribbled on the walls were messages like, "They listen," and "Vents are eyes." There were also arrows pointing to the air ducts. Dave wasn't there, but in the center of the room was a chair facing the wall we shared, with a small hole drilled right through it at eye level. A peephole into my own apartment. I froze, realizing he'd been watching me. But then I heard it, scratching, from his vents this time. Closer now. I turned to leave, and that's when Dave appeared in the doorway, blocking my exit. "You see now?" he said, his voice calm but his eyes furious. "They're in there. They whisper plans. The last guy, he tried to fight them. I had to make him quiet." Dave stepped forward, and I saw the knife in his hand, rusty, like from a toolbox. I shoved past him and ran to my place, then locked the door and called the cops. They arrived quick, but Dave was gone by then. They searched his apartment and found the hole, the notes, and even some old Polaroids of the previous tenant, tied up, eyes wide in terror. Turns out Dave wasn't 27. He was 42, with a history of schizophrenia and a missing persons report tied to his name from another town. The whispers were all in his head, but the danger was real. They never found him, at least not that I know of, because I moved out the very next day. Sometimes, in my new place, I still hear scratching at night. I know it's probably just the building, but I always check the vents, just in case. I dated a guy named Nick for almost 3 years, and around the 2-year mark I moved into his apartment with him. In hindsight, the relationship wasn't really going anywhere, and it would have been best to break things off a lot sooner, but I guess I kept thinking this was what a mature adult relationship was supposed to be like. Anyway, Nick and I both had decent jobs, and his apartment was nice. It was within walking distance to a shopping center, and my commute was only like 10 minutes. The building was one of those mid-rise complexes built in the 90s, clean and with a gym no one used and a pool that was always too cold. Our unit was on the 4th floor, 4C, with big windows overlooking the parking lot and a balcony where we'd sometimes have coffee in the mornings. Nick had lived there alone for a year before I moved in, and he always said it was perfect for us. Quiet neighbors and good security, but from the start, something felt a little off. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to these faint tapping sounds, like someone lightly knocking on glass. I'd nudge Nick, but he just mumbled that it was the wind or branches from the tree outside, even though there was no tree close enough to reach our balcony. At first I brushed it off, telling myself that it was a new place, so there would be new sounds. But then little things started piling up. For instance, I'd come home from work and find my stuff slightly rearranged, like my keys not on the hook where I left them, or a drawer in the kitchen left ajar when I knew I'd closed it. Nick worked from home as a graphic designer, so I'd ask if he'd been looking for something. He'd always deny it, and give me this puzzled look like I was imagining things. "Babe, you must have forgotten," he'd say with a chuckle. But his eyes would linger on me a second too long, like he was studying my reaction or something. One evening, about a month in, I was alone while Nick was out grabbing takeout. I decided to deep clean the closet in our bedroom. It was this walk-in thing crammed with his old boxes that he never unpacked. As I pulled out a dusty storage bin from the back, something clattered to the floor. It was a small keychain with a heart-shaped locket attached. I popped it open, and inside was a photo of Nick with another woman, brunette, smiling, arms around him. They looked happy, like a couple on vacation. On the back of the photo, scrawled in faded ink, I saw, "Forever Sarah." I felt a chill. Nick had mentioned exes before, but never a Sarah. When he got home, I showed it to him. His face went pale for a split second before he laughed it off. "Oh, that's ancient history. High school sweetheart or something. Must have gotten mixed in with my junk." But he snatched it from me quick and stuffed it in his pocket, then changed the subject. That night, the tapping came back, louder this time. It wasn't on the window, it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls, rhythmic, almost like Morse code. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and whispered, "Nick?" He was asleep, or at least pretending to be, and snoring softly. I grabbed my phone and shone the light across the room, but everything looked normal. The next morning, I searched online for tapping noises in apartment walls. Rats, pipes, neighbors, nothing alarming. But then I typed in the building's address out of curiosity. A few forum posts popped up from years back, people complaining about weird vibes in Unit 4C. One even mentioning a previous tenant who vanished overnight. I laughed it off as urban legends, but it nagged at me. Things got weirder when I started noticing shadows. Not like ghosts or anything supernatural, that would have been too easy to dismiss. No, it was more like glimpses in my peripheral vision, a shape darting across the balcony at dusk, or a figure standing just outside the bedroom door when I was in the shower. I'd rush out, towel wrapped, only to find nothing. Nick started working later hours, claiming deadlines, so I was alone more often. One night, I heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, pacing in the living room while I was trying to sleep. I called out, "Nick, you home early?" There was no answer. I crept to the door and peeked through the crack. The room was empty. However, I noticed the balcony door was cracked open, curtains billowing slightly. I knew for a fact that I'd locked it. Freaked out, I confronted Nick the next day. "Something's wrong with this place. I hear things and see them. Maybe we should get the locks changed or call maintenance." Surprisingly, Nick got defensive, his voice sharpening in a way I'd never heard before. "You're being paranoid. It's stress from the move. Drop it." But later that evening, as we watched TV, he casually mentioned Sarah for the first time. She lived here too, you know, briefly, but she was unstable, started hearing voices and accusing me of stuff. That's why I had to end it. I don't know why, but hearing those words, my stomach dropped. "What happened to her?" I asked. Nick shrugged. "She moved out one night, and I never heard from her again." That sealed it for me. While Nick was asleep, I snuck into his home office, a spare room he kept locked when he wasn't using it. I'd seen him punch in the code once, 0723. The door clicked open, and inside, it was like a shrine. Walls covered in photos of me, but also of Sarah and another woman before her. These included candid shots, such as us sleeping, in the shower, and on the balcony. There was a small monitor hooked up to hidden cameras around the apartment, tiny ones in the vents, the clock, and even the smoke detector apparently. And in a drawer, a journal filled with entries. "She suspects, tapping tonight to test. Shadow play worked, she's scared." The realization hit me all at once. It was Nick, all of it. The noises, the rearrangements, the intruder sensations. He'd been gaslighting me, just like the others. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the door swung shut behind me. Nick was there, eyes cold. "You weren't supposed to find this yet." He lunged, but I screamed and shoved past, bolting for the front door. Neighbors heard the commotion and called the cops. It turns out Sarah hadn't just moved out, she'd filed a restraining order before disappearing. The other woman too. Nick had a pattern, luring girlfriends in, breaking them down with mind games, and making them doubt their sanity until they fled, or worse. I luckily managed to get out and press charges. Nick's in jail now, but sometimes in my new place, I still hear that tapping at night. I know it's probably just the pipes, but that experience changed me. Anyway, I always check the vents, just in case. A few years ago, I was promoted and transferred to another location for work, and honestly, life couldn't be going better. I had to move in a hurry, but it was exciting and I wasn't really attached to the place I'd been living. I've ended up working at this location since then, but when I first got to the city, I hadn't picked out a house yet. I was actually just staying at a hotel, but I quickly picked out a decent-sized apartment and started the move-in process. The complex was one of those modern setups on the edge of downtown, gated entry, underground parking, and even a small fitness center. My unit was on the 3rd floor, 312, with a view of the city lights that made the higher rent feel worth it. The landlord, an older guy named Mr. Harlan, seemed nice enough during the walkthrough. At one point, he mentioned the previous tenant had left abruptly due to a family emergency, but everything looked spotless. Fresh paint, new carpets, and no weird smells. I signed the lease that day and moved my boxes in over the weekend. On that first night, I crashed pretty hard from the drive, but woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like a baby crying. It was faint and muffled, like it was coming from the unit below. I figured it was just the neighbors and went back to sleep. However, the crying became a pattern. Every night, around the same time, it'd start soft and build to those heartbreaking wails before cutting off abruptly around dawn. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering why no one else seemed bothered. During the day, I'd pass people in the hallways, like couples and singles and an elderly lady with a yappy dog, but no one with a baby. Eventually I asked Mr. Harlan about it one morning while grabbing my mail. "Oh that?" he said, chuckling. "Probably the vents carrying sound from somewhere. Old pipes act funny sometimes." But something about his smile felt off, and he changed the subject quick, asking how I was settling in. Over the next week, I started noticing other oddities. I'd come home from work and find the thermostat cranked up to 80 degrees when I knew I'd left it at 72. Or my coffee mug would be in the sink, rinsed out, even though I hadn't touched it since morning. Little things like that were easy to blame on forgetfulness from the stress of the new job, but then came the drawings. I found the first one slipped under my door, a child's crayon scribbling of a stick figure family, a mom, dad, and a baby in a crib. There weren't any words on it, it was literally just the picture. I tossed it, assuming some kid in the building was playing around. However, the next day, I received another one. It was the same family, but the baby was crossed out in red. It was creepy, to be sure, but I still laughed it off as a prank. That night, the crying was louder, almost like it was right under my bed. I got up and pressed my ear to the floor. It definitely seemed to be coming from below. Frustrated, I threw on clothes and went downstairs to apartment 212. I knocked politely, and there was no answer. So I knocked harder, still nothing. However, right as I turned to leave, the door to 212 creaked open just a crack. Inside was pitch black, but I caught a whiff of something sour, like spoiled milk. "Hello?" I called. There was silence, but then, from the darkness, a woman's voice whispered, "Shh, you'll wake her." Then the door slammed shut, and I bolted back upstairs, heart hammering. The next morning, I knew I had to confront Mr. Harlan. "Who is in 212?" I asked. "They have a baby that's crying all night." He paused and began fiddling with his keys. 212? That's vacant. It's been empty for months. The last tenants were a young couple, nice folks, but they lost their baby. It was a tragic crib death. They moved out right after. My blood ran cold hearing those words. Lost their baby? When? Mr. Harlan shrugged. About a year ago. Why? I didn't answer. I just went back to my place and started packing an overnight bag. But before I left for good, curiosity got me. That afternoon, I waited until the hallway was clear and tried the door to 212. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick and dusty, like no one had been there in ages. The furniture was still there, covered in sheets, but the nursery caught my eye. A crib in the corner, mobile hanging limp. On the walls were more crayon drawings, dozens of them, families with a baby scribbled out over and over. And in the crib, a baby monitor plugged in, humming softly. I picked it up, and through the static, I heard breathing, slow, like someone was listening. Then a voice crackled. "She's awake now, thanks to you." I dropped it and ran, but as I hit the hallway, I saw her, the woman from the night before, standing at the end of the corridor, holding what looked like a bundled blanket. She didn't move, instead she just stared. I locked myself in my apartment and called the police. They checked 212, but when they did, it was completely empty, with no signs of anyone. They did find the baby monitor, still on, connected to a receiver hidden in the vents, leading straight up to my unit though. Mr. Harlan confessed later, the couple never really left. The wife had gone mad after the baby's death, convinced it was still alive. She'd been squatting in vacant units, moving through the maintenance crawl spaces, caring for her ghost child. The husband? He'd helped cover it up until he couldn't anymore. They'd found his body in the basement months back, ruled a suicide. The police got her into custody. She was delusional, harmless mostly, but she'd been watching me, slipping in when I was at work, leaving gifts. I broke the lease and moved out that week, and now in my house across town, nights are quiet. But there's no way I can forget that experience. Even now, when the AC kicks on, I swear I can hear a faint cry through the vents. It's probably just the wind, but I always check, just in case. For a while, I lived in this new apartment complex in the suburbs, and the surrounding area was quite beautiful. The place sat in the middle of this field/greenbelt area, and there were creeks and walking trails. I'd go there after work sometimes to clear my head, or any time I had nothing to do. The complex itself was brand new, with sleek buildings with that fresh paint smell, a community clubhouse, and even a dog park, though I didn't have a pet. My unit was on the ground floor, 105, with sliding glass doors opening right onto the greenbelt. It was perfect for quick access to the trails, which wound through tall grasses and over little bridges crossing the creeks. They also led into wooded patches that felt worlds away from the city. I'd lace up my sneakers, pop in some earbuds, and wander for hours, listening to podcasts or just the rustle of leaves. It was the perfect escape from the grind of my desk job. But about 2 weeks in, I started noticing footprints. Not just any, fresh ones that mirrored my path, like someone had been trailing me but staying off the main trail. I'd spot them in the soft mud by the creek, boot prints, larger than mine, veering into the bushes where the trail narrowed. At first I thought it was another resident, or maybe a jogger cutting through. The complex was family friendly, with kids playing outside and couples walking dogs, so it didn't seem out of place. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched, I glanced back and swore I saw a figure ducking behind a tree. He was tall and hooded, motionless until I turned away. That night, back in my apartment, I heard rustling outside the sliding doors. The curtains were drawn, but the sound was unmistakable, leaves crunching, and a soft scrape against the glass, like fingers testing the lock. I froze where I was laying on the couch, heart thudding, and peeked through a gap. Nothing but the empty patio and the dark green belt beyond. I double-checked the locks, then chalked it up to wind or an animal and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The trails that had been so peaceful now felt exposed, like eyes could be watching from anywhere. The next day, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor, an older woman in 106 named Mrs. Ellis. She was watering her plants on her patio when I stepped out. "Oh, the trails? Lovely, aren't they? But be careful at dusk. Strays wander in from the fields." She paused, her eyes flicking to the woods. "And, well, there was that incident last year, before the complex was built. Some hiker went missing. They found his backpack by the creek, but never him. Developers cleared it all up quick." I laughed nervously, but her face stayed serious. "Just saying, dear, lock up tight." Her words stuck with me. That afternoon, I took a different route on the trails, looping further into the woods where the path got overgrown. That's when I found the camp, hidden in a thicket, a tattered tent half buried in leaves, surrounded by trash. Empty cans, a rusted lantern, and what looked like a sleeping bag stained with something dark. No one was there, but the fire pit was warm, ashes still smoldering. I backed away fast and phoned the complex management anonymously from my cell. They said they'd check it out, probably just a homeless guy, no big deal, and that was that. But then that night, the scraping returned, louder and more insistent. I grabbed my phone to record it, creeping to the doors. Through the glass in the moonlight, I saw him, the figure from the trails, crouched on my patio, face obscured by a hood, gloved hands prying at the frame. I yelled, "Hey!" and he bolted into the greenbelt. I called the cops, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. They found footprints leading back to the woods and promised to patrol the area, but suggested it was a random vagrant and nothing could really be done. Obviously, I couldn't sleep well after that. I'd also hear whispers through the vents, faint, like someone muttering nearby, but the walls were thick, so I blamed exhaustion. Then one rainy afternoon, I was unpacking the last of my boxes in the closet when I found it, a loose panel in the back wall, hidden behind shelves. I pried it open, and beyond was a crawl space, dark, musty, with insulation hanging like cobwebs. Shining my flashlight in, I saw signs of life, a blanket, food wrappers, and a notebook filled with sketches of the trails. There was also my apartment marked with an X, and dates matching my walks. Worst of all, photos, Polaroids of me on the paths, taken from afar, my back turned. This is where panic started to set in. This wasn't just some random guy, he'd been inside, accessing through maintenance tunnels that connected the units to the Greenbelt's utility sheds. The missing hiker Mrs. Ellis talked about? Turns out he was a former construction worker on the complex, fired for stalking residents during the build. He supposedly vanished afterwards, but police linked him to similar cases in nearby suburbs, living in hidden spaces, watching and waiting. I reported all my findings to the police, and luckily they caught him that week, lurking in the woods with my spare key. He apparently duplicated it somehow during the build. Either way, I moved out immediately, to a high-rise downtown with no trails in sight. But even now, when I hear leaves rustle outside a window, I check the closets and the vents, just in case. I lived in a dorm my first 2 years at college, but then decided it was time to move into my own apartment. Or at least, an apartment, as I need to have a roommate to split the rent. Through networking on campus, I got in touch with another girl named Pamela who was looking to move out as well. When I first met her, I was taken aback, as she was a bit older than your typical college student. There was also something slightly off about her as well, but maybe because I really wanted to move out, I overlooked that and agreed to move into an apartment with her. I'd had dorm mates and was generally fine living with other people. The place we found was affordable and close to campus, a 2-bedroom in an older brick building with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings that echoed every step. It had that vintage charm, or so I told myself, with big windows letting in lots of light during the day. Pamela took the larger room since she had more stuff, and I didn't mind. Mine overlooked a quiet alley. We moved in over a weekend, hauling boxes up the narrow stairs while chatting about classes and majors. Pamela said she was studying psychology, going back to school after a rough patch in her life. Her smile was warm, but her eyes, they had this distant glaze, like she was always half listening to something else. The first few days were normal enough. We'd cook simple meals together, watch Netflix in the living room, and she'd even help with my laundry sometimes. But then a few things started to bug me. Pamela was a night owl, pacing the apartment at odd hours. I'd hear her footsteps creaking from her room to the kitchen and back, sometimes stopping right outside my door. One night, I cracked it open to ask if everything was okay, and she was just standing there in the hallway, staring at the wall. "Just thinking," she whispered, then shuffled away without another word. It got weirder when I noticed her collection. In her room, which she kept the door cracked to, like an invitation almost, I spotted shelves lined with old dolls. They weren't particularly cute either. These were antique porcelain things with chipped paint and glassy eyes that seemed to follow you. "Family heirlooms," she explained when I asked, stroking one like it was alive. "They keep me company." I tried my best to just laugh it off, but that night I swore I heard whispering from her room, soft, childlike voices murmuring through the thin walls. I pressed my ear against it, but it stopped abruptly, replaced by Pamela's low chuckle. A week in, things escalated. I came home from a late study session to find my room rearranged, not drastically, but my books alphabetized differently, my clothes folded in drawers I hadn't touched. "Did you clean my room?" I asked her over dinner. Pamela tilted her head, that off smile returning. "No, why? Maybe you did it in your sleep. People do that sometimes. They dissociate." Her psych major talk always had this edge, like she was diagnosing me. That same night, I woke up to a weight on my chest, like something pressing down. Gasping, I sat up, but nothing was there, just the faint scent of lavender, like old perfume, lingering in the air. Curiosity turned to unease when I found the photo. While Pamela was out, I think at a so-called study group, I snooped a bit, just peeking into her closet for extra hangers. Tucked in a shoebox were Polaroids, dozens of them, showing different young women in what looked like our apartment. Some were laughing, some sleeping, but all had that same distant look in their eyes. On the back of one, roommate number 7, too nosy. My heart dropped as I read those words. I shoved it back and pretended nothing happened when she returned, but I started locking my door at night. The whispers grew louder after that, not just from her room, from the vents, the closets, even under my bed. It was always at 3 a.m., like clockwork. "Help us, she's coming." I'd bolt upright, sweating, and hear Pamela's door creak open, her footsteps approaching. She'd knock softly. "Bad dream? Want to talk?" I'd mumble no, but one time, I looked through the peephole. She was holding one of those dolls, its head twisted unnaturally, eyes fixed on my door. Finally, it got to be too much, and I decided to confront her. One morning, I asked point blank, "What's with the photos? Who are those girls?" Pamela's face hardened immediately, the warmth gone. Previous roommates, they didn't last. They were too sensitive. She leaned in, voice dropping. "Like you, hearing things that aren't there, but they are there if you listen close." She grabbed my arm, grip like iron. "The dolls, they remember everything." Completely freaked out, I called campus housing for advice, but they had no record of a Pamela enrolled. Digging online, I found news articles. A woman named Pamela in her 40s, suspected in the disappearances of several young co-eds over the years. She'd posed as a student, lured them into shared living, and then, well, they vanished. Police thought she had a breakdown after losing her own child, started collecting surrogates, drugging them into compliance with that lavender-scented tea she always brewed. That was absolutely everything I needed to hear. I packed a bag that day, but she was waiting when I tried to leave, door barred, doll in hand. "You can't go, they need you." Pamela lunged at me and we struggled. I screamed during the scuffle, and luckily neighbors overheard it and called the cops. They found the photos and the hidden sedatives in her room, and restraints under her bed. It turns out the dolls were more than heirlooms. They included hair clippings from past victims woven into them. Pamela's locked away now, but I hear those whispers sometimes in my new place. Probably just the wind, but even so, I always check under the bed. After breaking up with my long-term girlfriend, I decided to find a new apartment after dealing with all the memories became too much. We'd shared a place for 4 years, and every corner reminded me of her laugh in the kitchen, her perfume on the pillows. I needed a fresh start, so I hunted for something simple and solo. I ended up in this mid-century building downtown, Unit 5D on the top floor. It was compact but cozy, with exposed brick walls, a small balcony, and rent that didn't break the bank. The super, a gruff guy named Rico, handed over the keys with a warning about the quirky plumbing, but otherwise it seemed perfect. It didn't share any walls with noisy neighbors, just the roof above and quiet offices below after hours. The first night, I only unpacked what I needed, a bed, couch, and a few boxes, and crashed early. Then I woke up around midnight to a faint dripping sound from the bathroom. Figuring it was that quirky plumbing Rico had told me about, I tightened the faucet and went back to bed. But the next morning, the sink was bone dry, and I couldn't find any leaks. Even so, I shrugged it off, headed to my job at the coffee shop down the block, and tried to forget about it. When I got home that evening, though, the faucet was running full blast, water overflowing onto the floor. I mopped it up, completely confused. Had I left it on earlier? My ex used to tease me about being absent-minded, but this felt different. Over the next few days, the water issues only escalated. I'd hear gurgling in the pipes at odd hours, like someone flushing upstairs, but I was the top unit. One time, I came back from a run to find the bathtub half full, steam rising as if it had just been drawn. There was no way I did it. Eventually I called Rico, who came up grumbling, checked the pipes, and found nothing wrong. "Probably air in the lines," he muttered, eyeing me like I was a problem. That night, as I lay in bed scrolling my phone, the shower turned on by itself, hot water blasting. It startled me and I jumped up and shut it off, but not before noticing the mirror fogged up with a single word traced in the condensation: "Miss you." My stomach twisted. It looked like my ex's handwriting, loopy M, curly S. I wiped it away, heart racing, and texted her on impulse. "This isn't funny, stop messing with me." I received no response, which wasn't surprising, as we'd blocked each other after the breakup. I told myself it was a coincidence, maybe humidity playing tricks, but sleep was rough after that. The next day, more messages appeared. "Come back" on the kitchen window after a rainstorm, and "Y" smeared in soap scum on the shower tile. Always when I was out, always in her style. I was completely freaked out, but decided to start documenting it. Photos on my phone, even set up a cheap webcam in the bathroom. I didn't manage to catch anything on the camera, but the incidents kept coming. One evening, I found a puddle on the floor with flower petals floating in it, daisies, her favorite. I decided to confront Rico again. Is someone pranking me? An ex-tenant with a key? He only laughed it off. "Kid, this building's over 60 years old. Ghosts in the pipes, maybe." But his joke fell flat, and I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Desperate, I dug into the building's history online. Buried in old news archives, I found a drowning in Unit 5D 20 years back. It was a woman named Elena, found in her tub, ruled accidental but suspicious. Apparently her boyfriend claimed she'd been depressed after their split and left notes begging him to return. Photos showed the apartment layout identical to mine, and Elena, she looked eerily like my ex, same curly hair and same smile. The boyfriend had vanished before questioning, and the case had gone cold. That night, the water roared on again, this time the sink, tub, and shower all at once, flooding the bathroom. I slipped in, yelling, and as I steadied myself on the mirror, it shifted. I pushed harder, and then it swung open like a door, revealing a narrow utility space behind. Pipes snaked everywhere, and a figure huddled in the dark. Rico, soaked and wild-eyed, holding a remote valve controller and a bouquet. "She missed you," he rasped, lunging with a wrench. "They all do." We fought, me slipping on the wet floor, him ranting about saving broken relationships by recreating Alina's fate, his sister, whom he'd accidentally drowned in a fit of rage after her breakup. He'd rigged the plumbing years ago, using hidden access panels to stage hauntings, driving tenants mad until they reunited in despair. Police later found his logs, dozens of victims over the decades, all post-breakup loners like me, manipulated to get back with their exes, or else have accidents. Luckily, I only got away with bruises and was able to testify against him. He's in prison now, and I think the building's actually condemned. I live in a dry, modern high-rise across town, no old pipes and no history. But whenever I hear a drip in the night, I shut off the main valve, just in case. In my early 20s, I moved into a new apartment that was a few blocks away from a theme park. You might think that'd be great, and while it's true I did visit it sometimes, there was traffic and other problems. The building was an older one, tucked on a side street just beyond the park's glowing entrance gates, close enough to hear the roller coasters rattling and crowds cheering during the day, but far enough that rent was a steal for a recent grad like me scraping by on entry-level pay. My unit was 2F, second floor with a window facing the alley that led toward the park's back lot. I'd crack it open on warm nights for the breeze, catching whiffs of cotton candy and popcorn mixed with exhaust from the endless shuttle buses. At first, it was kinda cool. Falling asleep to distant carnival tunes felt whimsical, like living in a perpetual summer fair. But after a couple weeks, the novelty started to wear thin. The screams from the thrill rides echoed at all hours, blending into my dreams, and I'd wake up disoriented, thinking someone was in trouble right outside. One night, around 1 a.m., the park had long since closed, lights off, gates locked, but I heard it, faint calliope music, tinny and warped, like from an old music box. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and listened. It wasn't coming from the street, instead it seemed to filter in through the walls or maybe the vents. Then there was giggling, childlike, playful at first, then twisted into something sharper, almost mocking. I checked my phone and saw there were no alarms, and no neighbors blasting tunes. Then I peeked out the window. The alley was empty, just shadows from the park's silhouetted Ferris wheel in the distance. I told myself it was an echo, or maybe maintenance testing speakers, and tried my best to get back to sleep. But it happened the next night, and the next night after that, always starting soft, building to bursts of laughter that cut off abruptly. While it was a bit annoying, at this point I was still more curious than scared. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor, an older guy named Hank who worked odd jobs at the park. We bumped into each other in the laundry room, a dim basement spot with flickering bulbs and the constant hum of dryers. "Oh, that?" he said, folding his shirts with deliberate slowness. "Buildings got thin insulation. Park noises carry funny after dark. But yeah, steer clear of wandering over there at night. There used to be a guy, a performer, clown type, who'd hang around after hours. He was a creepy fella. I haven't seen him in years, but you never know." Then Hank glanced away, like he'd said too much, and shuffled out. Despite his words, they planted a seed. The next evening, after my shift at the diner, I took a walk toward the park's perimeter fence. It was chain-link topped with razor wire, signs warning no trespassing. The grounds were dark, save for a few security lights, but as I got closer, I heard it again. That music, clearer now, accompanied by shuffling footsteps. I froze when a shadow moved along the fence, a tall figure in baggy clothes, face painted white with exaggerated red lips, honking a horn softly. It turned, spotting me, and waved with exaggerated enthusiasm before vanishing into the underbrush. Heart pounding, I hurried home, locking every bolt. Back in my apartment, I searched online for the park's history. Buried in local forums and old news clips, I found an article about a scandal 5 years back. A clown performer named Rudy had been fired after complaints. He'd get too into character, scaring kids off script, even following families out of the park. One night, he snapped during a late shift, locking himself in the funhouse with a group of stragglers, terrorizing them with props turned into weapons. Luckily no one died, but a few people needed stitches and therapy. Rudy escaped before the cops arrived, and he was apparently never caught. The descriptions there matched what I had seen, a tall, painted face, and that eerie wave. Unfortunately, the sounds intensified after that. I'd hear scratching at my door around midnight, then whispers through the keyhole, "Come play," in a sing-song voice. One morning, I even found a red balloon tied to my doorknob, deflated, with a smudgy smiley face drawn onto it. I yanked it off and tossed it, but that night, looking out my window, there he was! The clown, standing in the alley below, staring up in my light. He tilted his head, then blew a kiss before melting into the shadows. I panicked and called the non-emergency line, but they dismissed it as a prankster. Park towns attract weirdos, they said. Hank wasn't around when I knocked, so I set up my phone to record overnight. Around 2 a.m., the footage caught it, my doorknob jiggling, then a gloved hand slipping a note under the door. It read, "Fun's just starting, join the show." I didn't sleep, instead barricading myself in until dawn. The next day, I staked out the alley from my window. As dusk fell, I saw movement, not from the park, but from the building's fire escape. The clown emerged from a basement window, climbing up toward the roof. Wait, the basement? I grabbed a flashlight and headed down, heart in my throat. The laundry room door was ajar, and beyond it, a storage closet I'd never noticed, unlocked. Inside, I found a makeshift lair, walls plastered with park maps, stolen costumes, and photos of tenants snapped from afar. Rudy must have been squatting there for years, using the building as a base to perform after dark, escalating to break-ins when bored. All at once, something lunged from the shadows as I turned to run, grease paint-smeared face twisted in glee, wielding a prop mallet that felt all too real. It was Rudy. I screamed and fought back with a flashlight, then bolted upstairs as neighbors poured out. The cops arrived quick, but I was in for one final shock. It turns out Rudy was Hank, plastic surgery and a fake ID after his escape, working at the park under the radar, even using the basement to relive his glory days by terrorizing locals. They hauled Hank, or I guess Rudy, away while he was ranting about eternal fun. Then the building evicted everyone for safety checks, and I crashed with friends until finding a new place far from any carnivals. And now, when I hear distant music at night, I close the windows tight, just in case. For a few months I lived in an apartment with 3 other guys. I'll call them Tony, Mike, and Tim for this story. I didn't know any of them before moving in, as I only looked for another place to stay when the pipes burst in my old building. The apartment was a spacious 4-bedroom in a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town. High ceilings, exposed ducts, and that echoey feel where sounds bounced around unpredictably. Rent was split 4 ways, making it affordable, and the guys seemed laid back. Tony was the outgoing one, always cracking jokes. Mike was quiet, buried in his laptop, and Tim was the handyman type, fixing stuff around the place. We had a common area with a big sectional couch and a kitchen that smelled like takeout most nights. I took the smallest room at the end of the hall, figuring it'd be quiet. At first, everything seemed fine. We'd hang out watching games and sharing beers, and there was no drama. But about a week in, I started noticing cold spots. Not like drafts, these were pockets of icy air that hit you out of nowhere, even in summer. I'd be grabbing a snack from the fridge, and suddenly the kitchen would feel like a freezer, my breath fogging up. I'd mention it casually, "Hey, AC acting up?" and they'd exchange glances before Tony laughed it off. "Nah man, the building's old, ghosts in the vents or something." Then they'd all chuckle in unison, like it was some kind of inside joke. I shrugged it away, but one night, lying in bed, I felt it creep into my room, freezing tendrils wrapping around my feet under the covers. I sat up, shivering, and heard a low hum from the vents above, like wind whistling through cracks. The next morning, I checked the thermostat. It was steady at 72 degrees. Tim was tinkering with the HVAC unit in the utility closet, tools scattered around. "Just maintenance," he said, not meeting my eyes. That afternoon, while they were out, I poked around the closet myself. Behind the furnace, I found a loose grate leading to a crawl space, dark, dusty, and with insulation peeling. I used the light on my phone to look inside, and I saw scratches on the metal ducts, almost like claw marks. There was also a faint outline of handprints in the dust. Somehow I convinced myself it was just animals. I sealed it back up and forgot about it. However, things got stranger with the mirrors. The apartments had a few, full length in the bathroom and a decorative one in the hall. I'd catch glimpses of movement, a shadow flitting behind me, one of the guys' reflections lingering a second too long after they left the room. One evening, I was brushing my teeth when I saw Mike in the mirror, standing right behind me, staring blankly. I whipped around, but I only saw an empty bathroom. Heart racing, I stormed into the living room and yelled, "Dude, not cool sneaking up like that." Mike looked up from his laptop, confused. "What? I've been here the whole time." Tony and Tim backed him up, all serious. That night, the cold hit harder and I heard scratching, from inside the walls this time, rhythmic, like nails digging for purchase. Desperate for answers, I searched the building's address online late one night. Forum posts from years back noted complaints about freezing apartments and things in the reflections. One actually detailed a previous tenant in our unit who'd frozen to death midwinter. The official cause was hypothermia, but there were whispers of foul play. The guy had ranted about cold entities in the vents before he died, claiming the building was built over an old ice house where workers had perished in a collapse, trapped and frozen. The developers covered it up, but residents reported apparitions, icy figures mimicking the living, stealing warmth until victims succumbed. I was skeptical, but I still decided to mention it to the other guys. "Do you know about the history here? Like, apparently people died." They were silent, and then finally Tony sighed. "Yeah, we knew. Figured it'd scare you off if we said up front. But they're just stories. Stay warm and don't let it mess with you." I couldn't help but notice their eyes darted to the vents, and that night, the scratching turned to banging, the temperature plummeting despite the heat blasting. I bundled up, but the cold seeped in, numbing my fingers. In the mirror across from my bed, I saw them, pale, frost-rimmed versions of Tony, Mike, and Tim, huddled in my room, reaching out with blue-tinged hands. I burst into the hall, yelling. The real guys rushed out, but as the cold enveloped us all, I realized the truth. They weren't scared, they were resigned. "It takes one every winter," Mike whispered, his breath visible. "We thought if we brought in a fourth, it'd pick you instead." Turns out, they lost their original roommate the year before, found him frozen stiff, eyes wide in the crawl space. Instead of moving out, they stayed, hoping to appease whatever lurked in the ducts by offering a newcomer. I fought the chill and grabbed my keys, then fled to my car, blasting the heat as I drove away. Police investigated after my report. They found no bodies, but the apartment was condemned for so-called structural hazards. Unexplained ice buildup in the vents, even in August. I don't know what happened to any of the guys after that, but they were apparently last seen heading north. I live in a warm, modern condo now, far from old warehouses. But when the AC kicks on too cold, I crank it off and layer up, just in case. For a while, I stayed in this apartment that had a very unique aesthetic. After looking things up online, I believe the proper term is fruitage or arrow, but oddly enough, this apartment was brand new. Like, it wasn't built in the early 2000s when things supposedly looked like that. The place was on the 5th floor of a sleek high-rise in a developing neighborhood, glass elevators, rooftop garden, the works. Inside my unit, 5E, everything screamed that retro-futuristic vibe. Glossy white countertops with subtle bubble patterns etched in, wallpaper featuring swirling tropical fish and cloudy skies, lens flare lighting fixtures that cast soft glows, and even the faucet shaped like stylized water droplets. It felt optimistic, like tech and nature in harmony, but in a way that made me nostalgic for Windows Vista or old iPods ads I barely remembered from childhood. The rent was surprisingly low for something so modern, and the leasing agent chalked it up to introductory rates for the building's first tenants. I signed on the spot, figuring it was a quirky upgrade from my cramped old studio. The first few nights were fine. I'd unwind after my graphic design gig by staring at the walls, watching how the light played off the glossy surfaces, creating illusions of movement. It almost looked like the fish were swimming if you zoned out for long enough. But around the third night, I noticed something off. I was in the living room scrolling my phone when a faint humming started from the ceiling vents, soft like a distant aquarium filter. Then, out of the corner of my eye, one of the wallpaper fish seemed to twitch, its fin rippling as if in water. I blinked, and it was still. Optical illusion, I thought, from the funky lighting. But that hum persisted, growing into a low bubble popping sound, like air escaping underwater. By the weekend, the anomalies began to pile up. I'd wake up to find the countertops fogged with condensation, even though the AC was off, and wiping it revealed faint streaks that looked like handprints. They were small and child-sized. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection lagged for a split second, like a video glitch, mouth closing after I'd stopped speaking. I joked about it in text to a friend. My apartment's haunted by Y2K ghosts. But privately, I searched more about fruitage or arrow. Forums described it as a Lost Era style, evoking harmony, but one thread mentioned an obscure designer named Elias Voss, who'd pioneered immersive aesthetics and prototypes, homes where the design adapted to occupants. Voss had vanished in 2012 mid-project, with rumors of mental breakdown from over-immersion. Curious, I inspected the apartment closer. Behind a loose baseboard in the bedroom, I found a small access panel, unmarked, but it popped open to reveal wiring bundles and a tiny LED screen flickering with code. Touching it, the room's lights dimmed and the wallpaper shifted. The fish swam lazily across the wall, bubbles rising in patterns that formed words. "Welcome home." I slammed the panel shut, heart pounding, but the humming intensified that night, now accompanied by whispers. They were garbled like voices through water. "Stay." play. In a state of panic, I called maintenance the next morning. The tech who showed up was evasive, muttering about smart features and resetting something in the panel. It's beta tech, he admitted. The building's wired with adaptive projections, holographic overlays in the walls, vents pumping scents and sounds for immersion. It's supposed to make you feel at ease or something. But his eyes darted, and he left quick. That afternoon, alone, the apartment adapted more. The fish followed my movements, clustering where I stood, and the bubble spelled, "Don't leave." I tried the door, it wouldn't budge, locks engaging remotely. Digging deeper on my laptop, before the Wi-Fi cut out, I found buried articles. Elias Voss hadn't vanished. He'd faked his death after his company went bankrupt from lawsuits. His immersive homes used AI to learn habits, but early versions trapped testers in loops, simulating endless harmony to study isolation. This building? It was apparently a secret revival, funded off books, with tenants as unwitting subjects. The aesthetic wasn't just decor, it was the interface, projecting illusions to keep you complacent while the AI collected data, escalating to lockdowns if you resisted. I smashed the panel that night as the whispers turned to please, join us, and the room filled with virtual water illusions, cold mist from vents making it hard to breathe. The door unlocked in the chaos, and I fled down the stairs, past identical units humming softly. Police dismissed my story as a panic attack, building records showed no adaptive tech, but the complex quietly shut down weeks later, citing structural issues. Now I live in a plain, no-frills rental, far from glossy designs. But sometimes, staring at a blank wall, I swear I see a fish flicker in the corner of my vision. I know it's probably just memories, but I always check the baseboards, just in case. For a while after graduating college, I stayed with my friend Mike, but after he got engaged and he and his fiancée made plans, I knew I had to move out. Crashing on his couch was fine temporarily, but I didn't want to be the third wheel in their new life. So, I scoured listings and found a one-bedroom in a quiet mid-rise building on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy, but it had secure entry, on-site laundry, and a small office nook perfect for my remote coding job. The rent was reasonable, and the manager assured me it was freshly renovated after the last tenant relocated suddenly, whatever that meant. Anyway, I moved in with just a few boxes, excited for some independence. The first week was uneventful. I'd work from home during the day, blasting playlists to fill the silence, and venture out for groceries or jogs in the nearby park at night. But then the mail started piling up, not mine, but addressed to a Jordan Ellis, the previous occupant. At first it was just junk, like catalogs and credit card offers. I'd scribble "return to sender" and drop them in the outgoing box. But one envelope stood out, no return address, just a plain white business size, postmarked locally. Curiosity eventually got to me and I opened it, figuring it was a mistake. Inside was a single sheet, "Payment due, don't ignore this." There were no details and no signature. I thought it was weird for sure, but I tossed it, assuming debt collectors had the wrong address. A few days later, more arrived, similar envelopes, but escalating in tone. "We know where you live," and "time's up." I'd stacked them unopened now, planning to notify the post office. But that night, as I was drifting off, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Open the mail." I sat up, chills running down my spine. I blocked the number immediately, but got another call from a different number. "Jordan, we see you." My name isn't Jordan, I'm Alex, but the coincidence unnerved me. I double-checked the locks and peered out the peephole into the empty hallway, then tried to get to sleep. The messages kept coming, via mail and texts, always vague threats mixed with personal details. "Nice jog yesterday. Coding late again?" By this point, I changed my number a few times now, but they found the new one quick. This is where paranoia started to set in. I draw the blinds early, avoid the park, and even switched up my work routine. One evening, coming home from a rare errand, I found my door ajar. There was nothing stolen, but the stack of Jordan's mail was gone from the counter. I called the cops, but with no forced entry or damage, they filed a report and suggested changing locks. The manager obliged, but muttered something about Jordan being in trouble before clamming up. Desperate, I dug online for info on Jordan Ellis. Social media was a dead end, no profiles matched. But a reverse address search pulled up a news blurb from about 6 months back. Jordan had gone missing, last seen leaving this building. Police treated it as a voluntary disappearance, debts and shady associates, but friends claimed foul play. Photos showed a guy who looked vaguely like me, same build and dark hair. My stomach knotted. That night, a new envelope under my door. "You're next if you don't pay." I confronted the manager the next morning. What happened to Jordan? These threats, are they connected? He sighed and glanced around. Look, kid, Jordan was into bad stuff, loans from the wrong people. He used this place as a drop, thought it stopped when he vanished. Then the manager paused. But maybe, check the storage unit, he left junk behind. The building had basement lockers, mine was empty, but Jordan's old one was still assigned. I pried it open with a spare key from maintenance. Inside were boxes of documents, fake IDs, and bank statements, all in different names, including mine. There were even forged papers with my photo, scraped from social media, listing me as an alias for Jordan's scams. All of a sudden, it clicked. Jordan hadn't vanished, he'd faked it, identity theft ring style, and was using me as a decoy. The threats were meant for him, but now I was in the crosshairs. That evening, as I shredded the docs, my phone rang. It was another unknown caller. I answered, furious. Who is this? Then a voice came through, calm and mocking. Alex? Or should I say, Jordan? Thanks for the cover, but you're digging too deep. I hung up immediately, but minutes later I heard footsteps in the hall, and then pounding on my door. I barricaded it and called 911. Cops arrived to find the hall empty, but they traced the calls to a burner nearby. Turns out Jordan was holed up in a motel across town, monitoring the apartment via a hidden app on the building's Wi-Fi, hacked during his tenancy. He'd been sending goons to collect debts, mistaking me for himself in some twisted paranoia. They arrested him mid-escape, unraveling a whole fraud network. I broke the lease and moved to a gated complex far away. No more weird mail now. But sometimes, when a text from an unknown number pops up, even spam, I delete it without reading, just in case. My wife and I originally bought a fixer-upper home and planned to save up and eventually remodel it. 5 years later, we met that goal and started going about the process of getting quotes. As we now had 2 kids and the changes would be expensive, my wife figured it would be best for us to stay somewhere else during the remodel. We started looking at hotels, including extended stays, and compared rates, but the best offer was a month-long lease in a new apartment building nearby. I'm not joking when I say this, it legitimately looked like a huge Cybertruck. The exterior was all angular stainless steel panels, sharp edges glinting under the sun, with massive garage doors at the base that made it feel more like a fortress than a residence. Inside, the lobby had that same vibe, minimalist, with touchscreen kiosks for everything from mail pickup to maintenance requests, and LED strips pulsing softly like a dashboard. Our unit was on the 3rd floor, 3G, a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the construction site of our real home a few blocks away. The kids, ages 4 and 6, thought it was the coolest thing ever, pretending the place was a spaceship. My wife and I appreciated the modern amenities, voice-activated lights, smart fridge that suggested recipes, even automated blinds that adjusted to the time of day. It was a short-term lease, fully furnished, so we settled in quick, unpacking just clothes and toys. The first couple nights were great, no dust from Renos, no chaos. But on the 3rd evening, as we were putting the kids to bed, the power flickered. It wasn't a full outage, just a quick dip that made the lights buzz and the smart TV glitch for a second. Probably just settling in, my wife said, but I noticed the touchscreen panel by the door, the one controlling the unit's systems, flashed a weird error code before resetting. I tapped it, and everything seemed fine. Later that night, though, I woke to a low rumble, like an engine idling beneath the floor. I got up and checked the windows, nothing outside but quiet streets. Eventually the sound faded, so I went back to sleep. By the weekend, the glitches ramped up. The fridge would beep randomly, displaying messages like, recharge required, even when full. The kids' bedroom lights turned on at 2 a.m., waking them screaming about the car man watching from the closet. We laughed it off as nightmares from the new place, but my wife found a small access hatch in the closet floor, bolted shut, labeled battery maintenance. Curious, I asked the building manager, a slick guy named Vance in a polo shirt with the complex's logo. Oh, that's part of the eco feature, he explained. The whole building runs on integrated battery packs like a giant EV. It stores solar energy and cuts bills. Don't worry about it. He smiled too wide, like a salesman closing a deal. But worry I did, especially when the rumbling returned nightly, now with vibrations that shook the bed slightly. One afternoon, while the kids napped and my wife ran errands, I pried open that hatch with a screwdriver. I just couldn't help myself. Below was a crawl space crammed with thick cables and humming battery modules, glowing faintly blue. Deeper in, something caught my eye, a bundle of wires spliced oddly, leading to what looked like a hidden camera lens pointed up through a vent grate. This was going right into our living room. I snapped a photo, heart racing, and sealed it back up. That evening, the smart system went haywire. Doors locked on their own while we were in rooms, trapping my son in the bathroom for minutes until I overrode it manually. The TV turned on to static, then flashed grainy footage of us from earlier that day, unpacking. "What the hell is this?" my wife whispered, grabbing the kids. We tried the front door. It was dead-bolted remotely, the panel reading "System update in progress." We started pounding on it, yelling for neighbors, but nothing happened. Then Vance's voice crackled over the intercom, "Please remain calm, testing phase." We barricaded in the bedroom, calling 911 on my cell. The signal was spotty, but it went through, thank God. As we waited, the rumbling peaked, the floor vibrating like we were moving. Sirens approached, and suddenly the locks clicked open. Cops busted in, Vance nowhere in sight at first. Turns out, the building wasn't just eco-friendly, it was a prototype for a mobile habitat system designed by a shady startup Vance fronted. The Cybertruck aesthetic had modular sections that could detach and relocate via underground rails for disaster response or whatever. But Vance was using it for black market experiments, wiring tenants' units with surveillance and EM fields from the batteries to induce compliance, selling behavioral data to shady corps. Previous short-term leasers had reported glitches, but were gaslit or paid off, I guess. They arrested Vance hiding in the basement control room, monitoring feeds. The building was shut down and our lease was voided. We're back in our remodeled home now, with everything normal, but when the power dips at night, I check the closets for hatches, just in case.